Hello students, welcome back to our general science class. I hope you'll had a great time learning about the nature of science and its branch in our last lesson. Today we are moving on to lesson 2, the scientific method. This is one of the most important lessons you learn in science because it is a tool that scientists use to discover new things. So let's dive into the detail of the lesson. Here are our lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, we should be able to define the scientific method, describe its major steps and apply to its solved problem, and identify variables in an experiment. So having this in your mind as we go along, let's proceed. What is scientific method? So, what exactly is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method is a systematic process that scientists use to investigate natural phenomena. It is like a roadmap for discovery. It helps scientists verify their observation and construct reliable explanation and acquire new knowledge. The scientific method is not a rigid set of rules. It is a flexible guide that scientists adapt depending on what they are studying. But it always involves making observation, asking questions, forming hypotheses, conduct experiment, analyzing data, and draw conclusion. So let's see each steps of the method. There are 7 main steps in the scientific method. Let me list them for you. As shown here in the slides, we have 7 steps. Observation, then comes a question, then hypothesis, then experiment and data collection followed. Then after analyzing, there is a conclusion and communication. We are going to go through each of these steps one by one. Can anyone guess what the first step is? Sure, yes. Observation comes first always. Let's start there. The scientific method always begins with making an observation. An observation is something you notice using your sense. Could be sight by your eyes, could be hearing, or you touch something, or by smell or taste. Sometimes we use instruments like microscope or thermometer. For that, we cannot see with our eyes alone. So, observation leads to questions. For example, let's say you observe that crops in a certain region of your community are failing despite the use of fertilizers. This observation makes you wonder what is happening. You may raise such question, and that leads to use the next step, which is question, step number 2. Based on your observation, you formulate a question. The question you should be specific. This question should be specific, clear, and testable. After observing things, you may raise questions. This question should be specific, should be clear, should be testable. In our example above, the question might be, how does soil pH affect the effectiveness of fertilizer in the soil? This is a great scientific question because we can actually design an experiment to answer it. So now comes the fun part for forming an hypothesis. This is the third step. Hypothesis, an educated guess or a tentative explanation about the problem, about the question. It is your best prediction of what you think will happen in your experiment. So, hypothesis often written as an if-then statement. For our soil pH example, the hypothesis could be if the soil pH levels affect the absorption of nutrients from fertilizers, then more acidic soil will reduce fertilizer effectiveness. Next, we design and conduct an experiment. Experiment is our fourth step in the method. To test our hypothesis, the experiment must be carefully designed to control variables and ensure reliable results. What does it mean to control variables? It means we change only one factor at a time while keeping everything else the same. This is called a fair test. In our example, scientists would apply fertilizer to soil with varying pH levels and measure crops growth and nutrient absorption. So, let's see variables in an experiment. We have different variables. Let's talk about them. The first, independent variables, which is what you change on purpose. In our plant growth experiment, that is the amount of sunlight. Independent variables. Second, dependent variables, what you measure or observe. This is the plant height. The height you measure is dependent variables. And the third type of variables is controlled variables. Controlled variables are things you keep the same for a fair test, like the type of plant, the type of soil, the amount of water, and the pot size. Can anyone give me another example of independent and dependent variables? Yeah, nice try, great. So let's move on to the next step, which is data collection. During the experiment, we collect data. The data is the information we gather. We record our data in a table with titles and headings that include units. So then we present our data using graphs. When we present our data in graphs, on a line graph, for example, the dependent variables goes on the x-axis, which is the horizontal line, and the dependent variables goes on the y-axis, which is vertical variable. We label both axes with units. Let's say, for example, we might create a table showing plant height in centimeters for each week, and then a line graph with weeks on the x-axis and the height on the y-axis. Because the height is what? It's a dependent variables. It's depend on our measurement. So we should put on the vertical axis. So let's move on. Once we have our data, we analyze to look for patterns. Based on our analysis, we draw certain conclusion. So the conclusion states whether our hypothesis is supported or rejected. If the results are inconsistent, we may need to revise our hypothesis and test it again. So, in our example, if the data shows that crops grow better in a soil with pH which is close to neutral, the conclusion will support our hypothesis that soil pH significantly impacts fertilizer's effectiveness. The last step is communication. This is the final step, communication. Scientists share their result with others. They do this by writing reports, by presenting their findings, by publishing in scientific journals. Why is this important? Why they communicate their result? Because sharing result allows allows other scientists to repeat the experiment and verify the findings. This is how scientific knowledge grows and becomes reliable. So, once more important point here is, a very important point, a hypothesis cannot be considered proven based on a single experiment. Multiple experiment is required. Multiple experiment must be conducted to confirm the findings. When a hypothesis is repeatedly supported by evidence from many different experiments, it may be developed into a theory. A theory is well-tested explanation. So let's see how this applies right there in our community. For example, in our scientific method can be used to study the impact of agricultural practice on soil health and develop effective strategy for sustainable agriculture. This is how sciences helps solve real problems in the country, in our community. Alright, students, let's do a quick recap what we learned today. First, the scientific method is a systematic process for investigating the natural world. Second, the 7 steps are steps of scientific methods: observation, question, then hypothesis, experiment, data collection, conclusion, and communication. The third, what must we know? We must identify and control variables in our experiment. And finally, a hypothesis that is repeatedly supported may become a theory. Now, let's check your understanding with a few quick questions. Ready? Number 1. Question number 1. What is the first step of scientific method? Good, you are right, it's observation. Question number 2. What do we call an educated guess that can be tested? That's right, it's a hypothesis. Question number 3. What is the difference between independent and dependent variables? Excellent. Well, students, you all did a fantastic job today. Next time, we will move on to the next lesson, lesson 3, which is entitled Common Laboratory Equipment and Safety Rules, where we will learn about the tools that scientists use in the lab. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next class. If this video helped you out, please give it a thumbs up and share with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss it the next lesson.